According to a controversial new biography, Elizabeth Taylor likes her lovemaking loud, rough, and frequent. Coincidentally, that's also how she likes to eat. Well, it's official. There you go. Michael Jordan is leaving baseball to return to basketball. It is unclear whether the media will now refer to him by his old basketball nickname, Air Jordan, or his more recent baseball nickname, Senior Crappy. In Walnut Creek, California, anyone who turns in his gun can get free therapy. And anyone who doesn't turn in his gun can get free anything.
Good morning. It's Friday, Policecraft Friday, December the 1st, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have shorts, and then we will have Destroyer, Strategies, Bishop Barron, and Policecraft. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I shouldn't change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now, the shorts.
This might look familiar to you if you remember the Buzzard from Grand Theft Auto, but the Buzzard is based off the AH-6 Little Bird. This is the MD-530F Cayuse Warrior. So what makes it different? Well, in effect, it's designed specifically for combat in the Middle East, or at least similar environments. Called a hot and high chopper, it's capable of operating continuously and at full efficiency in extremely hot temperatures and high altitudes. It's got two weapon configurations: the Hydra M260 rocket pod, which can carry 2x7 Hydra rockets, or the HMP 400 machine gun pod, which can pump out 1,000 rounds per minute with an M3P Gatling gun. Although the newest versions use a Dillon M134 minigun with close to 3,000 RPM. And interestingly enough, the current AH-6 Little Bird actually is based off this newest MD-530F, so if they made GTA today, it would be this chopper.
On the morning of July 4th, 1989, a MiG-23 Flogger fighter jet from the Soviet Air Force crossed into West German airspace without authorization. Two F-15 Eagle fighter jets were deployed to intercept the MiG-23. After making contact with the MiG-23, the F-15 pilots attempted to establish communication with the Soviet aircraft. However, all attempts were unsuccessful. When the F-15 pilots approached the aircraft to positively identify it, they observed that the armament under the Flogger was absent. What happened next would astonish them. Upon closer inspection, they discovered that the canopy of the Flogger had come off and no pilot was visible in the cockpit. In essence, the Soviet fighter was flying on its own, most likely via its autopilot system. The F-15 pilots followed the MiG-23 as it flew over several NATO countries. Eventually, the MiG-23 ran out of fuel and crashed into a house in Belgium, Belgium, tragically causing one fatality. An arresting wire is supposed to stop an aircraft from going overboard and plunging into the water. So what happens when an arresting wire breaks during a landing? As this video shows, faulty arresting gear can lead to some deadly consequences. Luckily, these pilots were able to avoid crashing into the water after coming within about 10 feet of the surface. Other pilots have been forced to eject at the last minute to escape from the plummeting aircraft. When this happens, a rescue team is deployed to recover them from the water. But it's not just the pilots who are in danger when a cable snaps. There have been numerous injuries and deaths on carriers from wires that snap and whip across the deck at 100 miles an hour, easily knocking down sailors and crew members and dragging them across the deck. Though extremely rare, these accidents show just how important it is to keep the arresting gear properly calibrated and maintained, and just how quickly a routine landing can turn into a terrifying situation.
The Italian FREMM frigate design is a proven and mature design, having been in service with the Italian and French navies for over a decade. This meant that the U.S. Navy could be confident that the design was reliable and capable, and that there would be no major surprises or delays in development. The Italian FREMM frigate is a relatively affordable design, especially when compared to other frigates on the market. The U.S. shipbuilding industry is currently at capacity, so the U.S. Navy needed to find a way to acquire new frigates without taking away from other programs. Partnering with Fincantieri, an Italian shipbuilding company, allowed the U.S. Navy to get the frigates it needed without putting a strain on the domestic shipbuilding industry. The acquisition of Italian-designed frigates is also a sign of the U.S. Navy's commitment to international cooperation. By working with Italy, the U.S. Navy is strengthening ties with an important NATO ally.
Have you ever questioned why each Typhoon-class submarine only had 20 ballistic missiles on board, but the smaller American Ohio-class submarines are armed with 24? Well, the truth is that the biggest submarines were simply not big enough. Yeah, it might be disappointing for many to hear, but it will make sense to you in just a few more seconds. Take a look at this. This thing is called the R-39 Riff, and it was Typhoon's ultimate weapon, weighing in at an enormous 84 tons. With a total of 20 missiles adding up to 1680 tons, plus all the other equipment and this swimming pool, the Typhoon-class submarines definitely required very large ballast tanks for buoyancy. The tanks were so massive that the brand new subs were often jokingly referred to as water carriers instead of missile carriers. Ballast tanks not only provided buoyancy for the massive missiles, but they also enabled these subs to break through layers of Arctic ice to launch their strike.
Guess who I just pulled over?
Who?
Yarborough.
Really?
Yeah, the chief deputy driving a Dodge Charger, a souped-up Dodge Charger belongs to the sheriff's office. I just clocked this up at 96 in a 35.
Really?
Yeah. Sir, here's your ID back. This is your copy of the citation. If you would sign right here. It's got a court date, time it must appear. Yes, sir. Please slow down and have a safe day.
He drove his truck through a police station. This Colorado man reportedly made over 90 calls to police over the past few years, reporting strange occurrences that the police deemed unfounded. But then one day he thinks he's being followed by multiple vehicles. So to escape his pursuers, he just slams his truck through the front of the police station into the lobby. He was then arrested and now has been charged with a number of things, including attempted murder. But he reportedly told the police he had to do this because, quote, he did not want to be killed.
It was strange enough that Major Gary Faust's F-106 Dart suddenly entered into a flat spin and began plummeting towards the ground during a training mission. But what happened next was even stranger. After ejecting from the doomed aircraft, Faust was shocked to see its nose dip downward, allowing the F-106 to level out again. It then proceeded to fly unmanned for several more miles before crash landing on its belly in a wheat field near Big Sandy, Montana. But here's where it gets even weirder. 9 years later, Major Faust was based at Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida when he was assigned to the very same F-106 that had nearly killed him years earlier. It turns out that despite the crash landing, the aircraft only suffered minor damage and had been promptly repaired and put back in service. After being reunited with its former pilot, this very special F-106 Dart was finally retired for good in 1986. And is now in the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio. As soon as the traffic light turned green, this car made an unexpected left turn into the busy intersection, enraging other drivers as it blocked their traffic lane. However, after witnessing this incident, a random woman quickly exited her car and rushed toward this moving vehicle, waving her hands to signal other cars to stop, as if she sensed something seriously wrong. To her surprise, she found the lady behind the wheel unconsciously slumped over the steering wheel due to her sudden medical episode. Without hesitation, our brave woman attempted to stop the moving car all by herself, but it was impossible. As she desperately cried for help, a group of complete strangers appeared out of nowhere to assist her in bringing the car to a halt. Together, they swiftly took the unconscious lady to a nearby hospital. The lady's life was saved, and all of these people were later honored as the city's heroes by the local police. Subscribe. During the Cold War, the SR-71 was supposed to be untouchable. Flying at Mach 3.2, it could outrun missiles and baffle even the Soviet MiG-25. Yet somehow the Swedish Air Force, flying much slower planes, intercepted SR-71s over and over again. During the 1980s, SR-71s made hundreds of flights over the Baltic Sea, giving Swedish pilots plenty of opportunities to practice intercepting them. But in the much slower J-37 fighter Vigans, the only chance they had was to try and meet the SR-71 head-on. Once airborne, the Swedish pilots had to use information from a data tracker system to begin pulling up at the exact right moment, and even then they'd only have a few seconds to lock on. As the pilot pulled up, they would accelerate into a steep climb while setting the radar scan angle to its maximum downward position. If successful, the pilot would then simulate a missile launch as the two aircraft came at each other with a closing speed of over Mach 5. But to get there, everything had to be flawless.
And that was the shorts. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Bishop Robert Barron.
I know a lot of people are really bothered by the financial crisis, and not just for practical reasons, but it kind of shakes them spiritually a bit. They're looking for some direction. And I would say this, that it's really important to know that our ultimate goal is God. It's only in God that our souls are at rest, as Augustine said. And the great temptation is always to say, I'll find a substitute. I'll say I'll find my ultimate happiness in pleasure or power or honor or wealth. Now, for Catholics, there's nothing in the world wrong with those things in themselves. We're not Puritans. Nothing wrong with being rich in itself. The trouble is when we substitute those things for God, then our spiritual equilibrium is thrown off. So I think one perspective on this might be, occasionally it's really good when our confidence in wealth or pleasure or power or honor is shaken. My finances are really shaky at the moment. I'm worried about my finances. Okay, that could be a good shaking of the foundations to make you realize there's a transcendent good beyond all those things.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, nothing can kill the Arleigh-Burke-class destroyer.
Class DDG-51 guided missile destroyer is the most capable surface ship in the U.S. Navy and is the workhorse of the fleet. Today, 62 of them roam the oceans, giving meaning to American command of the seas and to the multi-decade Pax Americana that operates so seamlessly we mostly take it for granted. These ships are the go-to capability when it comes to showing the flag and asserting U.S. rights under international law. Just last month, the USS Russell DDG-59, an Arleigh-Burke destroyer, conducted a freedom of navigation operation in the South China Sea. The United States has conducted similar operations with Arleigh-Burkes in the Black Sea, using the opportunity to signal American commitment to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization alliance. With its powerful suite of offensive and defensive weapons systems, the Arleigh-Burke is a true multi-mission ship capable of performing anti-submarine, air defense, missile defense, and land-sea attack missions. The Arleigh-Burke is the best air and missile defense ship in the world. Its powerful AN spy radar allows it to track both air and missile targets. The Aegis combat system allows these ships to engage multiple targets simultaneously. The newest Arleigh-Burke variants have the excellent Spy 6 anti-air and anti-missile radar on board. The Aegis combat system will then choose the right weapon from its inventory of standard missiles. This inventory includes the new SM-6, capable of engaging fixed-wing aircraft, helicopters, cruise missiles, and some ballistic missiles, and the SM-3, which is designed to engage longer-range ballistic missiles. The next defensive system to be deployed on the DDG-51 will be a laser. Offensively, the Arleigh-Burke also packs a powerful punch. It carries the Tomahawk long-range land attack cruise missile, including the newest Block 5. This version has extended range, enhanced navigation and communication systems, and an improved data link. The Block 5 will be deployed in both a maritime strike version, able to target moving ships, and a hard target kill variant that can destroy land structures such as hardened command posts. Along with the Tomahawk, many DDG-51s carry a mix of harpoon missiles, torpedoes, and anti-submarine rockets. The more modern variants also operate two MH-60R helicopters that can handle both submarines and surface targets. U.S. policy and strategy has adopted an enhanced focus on military competition with China in the West Pacific region. A large fleet of surface combatants is required to implement this strategy, along with aircraft carriers and submarines. Meanwhile, Navy force planning and the American political system are converging on accelerating acquisition of a new class of frigate, the Constellation, and quickly designing a new, larger ship called the Large Surface Combatant. This is anticipated to be a replacement for the Arleigh-Burke and possibly also the Ticonderoga-class cruisers. The Navy is also looking at producing new, smaller amphibious ships for the Marines and possibly a light carrier. Because of the desire to move to a large new surface combatant, construction of Burke's destroyers is expected to taper off. But a new ship program is an expensive effort. It will take at least a decade to design an entirely new combatant and begin construction. All defense acquisitions are difficult, but getting a new class of warship into production is especially challenging. The U.S. Navy has had significant challenges with new surface combatant designs in the last 20 years. The DDG-1000 Zumwalt-class destroyer, a truly magnificent and revolutionary warship, was so whiplashed by mission uncertainty, new technology integration, and design change orders that a planned acquisition of 32 ships ultimately produced 3. The Littoral Combat Ship has been judged as not up to the needs of the Blue Water Navy as its original mission as a counter-terror coastal platform has receded. Recently, engine problems caused the Navy to refuse to accept any additional Freedom-class Littoral Combat ships. It's worth remembering that the Navy terminated the Arleigh-Burke program to devote those resources to production of the DDG-1000. From 2006 to 2009, it did not acquire any DDG-51s. When the decision was made to truncate the Zumwalt class, the Navy had to restart the Arleigh-Burke production line. The additional costs associated with the production restart were significant. It might make sense to keep building the DDG-51 and upgrade and modernize her successful hulls for specific and additional missions. The U.S. Shipbuilding Industrial Base knows how to build the Arleigh Burke. There are 2 hot production lines, one in Maine, one in Mississippi. Keeping this building program going will maintain and even grow the fleet size quickly and at a known cost. The Navy should proceed carefully with its 2 new surface warships, the new frigate and large surface combatant. It is important to make sure the Navy does not inadvertently shrink the fleet size if either the larger vessel or the new frigate, or both, get into design, mission, technical, or political trouble. The Arleigh Burke destroyer is steel on the water today and has solid congressional support. A multi-year budget plan that saves money and a proven combat record. The next planned DDG-51 multi-year contract in fiscal year 2023 could extend or even increase this block buy. This will give the Navy time to perfect new surface combatant planning without risking the combat power of the current fleet.
And that was Nothing Could Kill the Arleigh Burke class destroyer. The last, what you were hearing was sound effects from various guns on the ship, and the very last was a torpedo that they put in the water. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, picking up where we left off from the 33 Strategies of War.
Think of yourself as always about to go into battle. Everything depends on your frame of mind and on how you look at the world. A shift of perspective can transform you from a passive and confused mercenary into a motivated and creative fighter. We are defined by our relationship to other people. As children, we develop an identity by differentiating ourselves from others, even to the point of pushing them away, rejecting them, rebelling. The more clearly you recognize who you do not want to be, then the clearer your sense of identity and purpose will be. Without a sense of that polarity, without an enemy to react against, you are as lost as the Greek mercenaries. Duped by other people's treachery, you hesitate at the fatal moment and descend into whining and argument. Focus on an enemy. It can be someone who blocks your path or sabotages you, whether subtly or obviously. It can be someone who has hurt you, or someone who has fought you unfairly. It can be a value or an idea that you loathe and that you see in an individual or group. It can be an abstraction, stupidity, smugness, vulgar materialism. Do not listen to people who say that the distinction between friend and enemy is primitive and passé. They are just disguising their fear of conflict behind a front of false warmth. They are trying to push you off course, to infect you with the vagueness that inflicts them. Once you feel clear and motivated, you will have space for true friendship and true compromise. Your enemy is the polar star that guides you. Given that direction, you can enter battle. From the book of Luke, he that is not with me is against me. The outer enemy. In the early 1970s, the British political system had settled into a comfortable pattern. The Labour Party would win an election, and then the next time around the Conservatives would win. Back and forth the power went, all fairly genteel and civilized. In fact, the two parties had come to resemble one another. But when the Conservatives lost in 1974, some of them had had enough. Wanting to shake things up, they proposed Margaret Thatcher as their leader. The party was divided that year, and Thatcher took advantage of the split and won the nomination. No one had ever seen a politician quite like Thatcher. A woman in a world run by men, she was also proudly middle class, the daughter of a grocer, in the traditional party of the aristocracy. Her clothes were prim, more like a housewife's than a politician's. She had not been a player in the Conservative Party. In fact, she was on its right-wing fringes. Most striking of all was her style. Where other politicians were smooth and conciliatory, she confronted her opponents, attacking them directly. She had an appetite for battle. Most politicians saw Thatcher's election as a fluke and didn't expect her to last. And in her first few years leading the party, when Labour was in power, she did little to change their opinion. She railed against the socialist system, which in her mind had choked all initiative and was largely responsible for the decline of the British economy. She criticized the Soviet Union at a time of détente. Then, in the winter of 1978 to 79, several public sector unions decided to strike. Thatcher went on the warpath, linking the strikes to the Labour Party and Prime Minister James Callaghan. This was bold, divisive talk, good for making the evening news, but not for winning elections. You had to be gentle with the voters, reassure them, not frighten them. At least, that was the conventional wisdom. In 1979, the Labour Party called a general election. Thatcher kept on the attack, categorizing the election as a crusade against socialism and as Great Britain's last chance to modernize. Callaghan was the epitome of the genteel politician, but Thatcher got under his skin. He had nothing but disdain for this housewife-turned-politician, and he returned her fire. He agreed that the election was a watershed, for if Thatcher won, she would send the economy into shock. The strategy seemed partly to work. Thatcher scared many voters, and the polls that tracked personal popularity showed that her numbers had fallen well below Callaghan's. At the same time, though, her rhetoric, and Callaghan's response to it, polarized the electorate, which could finally see a sharp difference between the parties. Dividing the public into left and right, she charged into the breach, sucking in attention and attracting the undecided. She won a sizable victory. Thatcher had bowled over the voters, but now as Prime Minister she would have to moderate her tone, heal the wounds. According to the polls, at any rate, that was what the public wanted. But Thatcher, as usual, did the opposite, enacting budget cuts that went even deeper than she had proposed during the campaign. As her policies played out, the economy did indeed go into shock, as Callaghan had said it would, and unemployment soared. Men in her own party, many of whom had by that point been resenting her treatment of them for years, began publicly to question her abilities. These men, whom she called the Wets, were the most respected members of the Conservative Party, and they were in a panic. She was leading the country into an economic disaster that they were afraid they would pay for with their careers. Thatcher's response was to purge them from her cabinet. She seemed bent on pushing everyone away. Her legion of enemies was growing, her poll numbers slipping still lower. Surely the next election would be her last. Then, in 1982, on the other side of the Atlantic, the military junta that ruled Argentina, needing a cause to distract the country from its many problems, invaded the Falkland Islands, a British possession to which, however, Argentina had a historical claim. The officers of the junta felt certain that the British would abandon these islands, barren and remote, but Thatcher did not hesitate. Despite the distance, 8,000 miles, she sent a naval task force to the Falklands. Labor leaders attacked her for this pointless and costly war. Many in her own party were terrified. If the attempt to retake the islands failed, the party would be ruined. Thatcher was more alone than ever. But much of the public now saw her qualities, which had seemed so irritating, in a new light. Her obstinacy became courage, nobility. Compared to the dithering, panty-waisted careerist men around her, Thatcher seemed resolute and confident. The British successfully won back the Falklands, and Thatcher stood taller than ever. Suddenly, the country's economic and social problems were forgotten. Thatcher now dominated the scene, and in the next 2 elections, she crushed labor. Interpretation. Margaret Thatcher came to power as an outsider, a middle-class woman, a right-wing radical. The first instinct of most outsiders who attain power is to become insiders. Life on the outside is hard, but in doing so, they lose their identity, their difference, the thing that makes them stand out in the public eye. If Thatcher had become like the men around her, she would simply have been replaced by yet another man. Her instinct was to stay an outsider. In fact, she pushed being an outsider as far as it could go. She set herself up as one woman against an army of men. At every step of the way, to give her the contrast she needed, Thatcher marked out an opponent. The socialists, the Wets, the Argentinians. These enemies helped to define her image as determined, powerful, self-sacrificing. Thatcher was not seduced by popularity, which is ephemeral and superficial. Pundits might obsess over popularity numbers, but in the mind of the voter, which for a politician is the field of battle, a dominating presence has more pull than does likability. Let some of the public hate you, you cannot please everyone. Your enemies, those you stand sharply against, will help you to forge a support base that will not desert you. Do not crowd into the center where everyone else is. There is no room to fight in a crowd. Polarize people, drive some of them away, and create a space for battle. Everything in life conspires to push you into the center, and not just politically. The center is the realm of compromise. Getting along with other people is an important skill to have, but it comes with a danger. By always seeking the path of least resistance, the path of conciliation, you forget who you are, and you sink into the center with everyone else. Instead, see yourself as a fighter, an outsider surrounded by enemies. Constant battle will keep you strong and alert. It will help to define what you believe in, both for yourself and for others. Do not worry about antagonizing people. Without antagonism, there is no battle. And without battle, there is no chance of victory.
And that was the next part of the 33 Strategies of War, Chapter 1, Declare War on Your Enemies. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now we will pick up where we left off 3 weeks ago with this book called Policecraft by Adam Plantinga.
3. Addiction. First you take a drink, then the drink takes a drink, then the drink takes you. F. Scott Fitzgerald. Gambling, which novelist André Malraux called suicide without death, works on the basis of intermittent reinforcement. You win just often enough to think you can do it on a regular basis. That's how gambling sinks its hooks into you. It's like when Charles Barkley used to shoot three-pointers. He hit just enough of them to think he could sink them every time. Some gamblers are so desperate to end their cycle of addiction that they will sign a sworn statement in the casino office banning themselves from that casino and agreeing to be arrested for trespassing if they return. And then they often do return, and you arrest them, although they've essentially arrested themselves. That oath they swore not to come back, that was a lie. Just another entry on the list of deceits addicts tell themselves. Theologian Lewis Smedes speaks to this when he observes in his book, A Pretty Good Person, nobody ever says, I think I will lie to myself today. This is the double treachery of self-deception. First we deceive ourselves, and then we convince ourselves that we are not deceiving ourselves. If you're wondering if your office NCAA tournament pool is illegal, it was up until May of 2018 when the Supreme Court struck down the 1992 federal law called the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act, which outlawed betting on nearly every sporting event outside the confines of Las Vegas. How about your poker night with the fellas? Depends on the state. About half of them outlaw private poker games where money changes hands, the violation typically being a misdemeanor. But the more important question is, do the police or anyone really care about this type of gambling? No, not especially. Not when your local circuit court judge is in on the pool and just sagely picked Lehigh to go to the Sweet 16. Not when the district attorney is among the guests at Texas Hold'em night. But if you have transformed your basement into a mini casino with a roulette wheel and craps table with cash payouts, and you aren't being particularly discreet about it, it's conceivable that the law will come knocking. What will happen next sort of depends. Years ago, my partner and I were going door to door, dropping off crime prevention flyers in the Ingleside district of San Francisco, when I walked into a community center and saw a sea of people playing an organized card game with a video screen and an MC. It was clearly for money and did not give off even a whiff of a charity event. Lo, a large-scale illegal gambling operation right in front of me. But it didn't look like there was a single person in the room under 60, and I got the sense that not a lot of English would be spoken. I started to imagine how many cops, how many translators, how many vans it would take to properly shut this operation down and book all the evidence. Whatever the number was, it was more than we had. My official police response? I said, My partner did me one better. He said, yeah. And we both slowly backed out and shut the door softly, leaving a lone crime prevention brochure in our wake. If the community made a complaint about this geriatric gambling den, we would revisit it. Otherwise, some doors are perhaps best kept closed. Good people work in addiction and recovery, and they know far more about this topic than I ever will. Many of them are addicts themselves who have found their way back. What I have learned from them is that addicts cannot fix themselves. It's like cancer patients trying to perform their own surgery. But the waiting list for drug treatment tends to be prolonged unless you have comprehensive insurance and/or the money to go to the programs they advertise on television that look like high-end spas with infinity pools and attentive masseuses. If you are underinsured or you don't happen to have $6,000 a month in discretionary income to spend on inpatient care, be prepared to wait for a city or state-funded program where a 6-month backup on treatment is not uncommon. For hardcore addicts, 6 months might as well be a century. That's another half a year to be out on the streets committing crimes to support their habit, risking contracting hepatitis C and HIV, and generally walking through the rubble of their own lives. Addiction is everywhere. If you don't think you know an addict, give it time and one will be revealed. Addiction ruins jobs and implodes marriages. You'd think, with all the societal debris caused by addiction that cops see on a daily basis, that they'd be able to sidestep these pitfalls themselves, but not so. Ask anyone from a department's behavioral health program, and they'll tell you a growing number of police officers are finding themselves addicted to painkillers. These pills are often prescribed for a duty-related injury, but the officer battles to wean himself off them long after the prescription has run out. And cops and booze are so inextricably linked that if you're an officer who doesn't drink, some of your coworkers just won't trust you. You will have friends on the job who are chronic drunks, a condition often handled with breezy nonchalance. Cop 1. I didn't know vodka and cranberry juice could make you shake like that. Cop 2. At least I get vitamins from the juice. Some of your colleagues disguise their affliction well, and you have no idea they're struggling until you hear they've been sent to the farm. Police speak for a drug program. Others don't even bother to hide it. They come into work classing up the joint in a t-shirt that says, "Tequila Police," unshaven, hair unkempt, already swigging Pepto-Bismol. You gotta drive the squad car that day because they're still hungover. In the macho, don't need help subculture of law enforcement, recovery and the language of recovery are often treated as a cheap joke. One cop will sarcastically ask his addict partner, "Hey, you practicing good self-care?" None of this, of course, is the way it should be. To act as a counterweight, many police departments staff their employee assistance programs not with civilians, but with police officers who are also experts in chemical dependency and understand the stress and depression that can accompany the job. They are well versed in both calling out Tequila Police and his ilk on their bullshit and helping them find a way forward. Even if you can sidestep the booze and pills, quite a few cops smoke. More so, I think, than the general public. One of my police academy instructors in San Francisco used to give our class a 10-minute break as soon as he showed up to teach so he could pop outside and have a cigarette. I didn't think we had quite earned a break yet, but hey, I have a vivid memory of another cop knowingly pushing through an alarmed door in police headquarters so he could have a smoke, bravely weathering the blaring siren for the sweet promise of nicotine. A few decades ago, it wasn't uncommon to see a cop in the station weight room smoking a cigarette while doing the bench press. The heavy smoking is due in part to the high number of ex-military on the force. Soldiers are known smokers. You get bored, one ex-Marine told me. There's also something about the job that at times suggests, even demands, a cigarette. After my first FTO, Gilbert Gwynn, and I engaged in a fierce battle with a drunk domestic violence, DV, suspect, armed with a knife, and wrestled him into custody, Gwynn lit up a smoke on the suspect's front porch. Then he turned to me, a non-smoker, and asked, "Does this kind of thing make you not want to be a police officer?" My first thought was, no, but it really makes me want one of those cigarettes. When you park your car, run an errand, and return to find your rear passenger window broken and your valuables gone, odds are the culprit was a drug addict. The man who just shoved that 80-year-old woman down and ripped away her purse, causing her to shatter her hip, likely an addict. They can't hold down regular jobs, so they take other people's things through guile or force in order to sell and finance their habit. You can lament the vice grip of addiction while still acknowledging the boatload of crimes drug addicts commit on a regular basis. Not all of these addicts seem to understand the scope of their problem. You'll ask a guy if he smokes crack, and he'll tell you, in all earnestness, "I smoke socially," as if he's talking about benignly puffing on the occasional pell-mell outside a bar with friends. Or you'll find yourself in conversations with people like James, a meth user who was peering into car windows in an area known for auto break-ins. As my partner ran a wanted check, I asked James what he did with himself. Did he work? Did he go to school? "I go to school," he said, "but I think it's canceled tomorrow. Do you know if it is?" "I'm not sure," I replied. "What school do you go to?" "I'm homeschooled," he explained with no trace of irony, nicely illustrating the mush heavy drug use makes of the human mind. But the brain of the drug offender does kick into high gear when it comes to picking out creative hiding spots for their dope so the police can't find it. Like fake hollowed-out cigarettes, liquid heroin disguised as eye drops in a Visine bottle, a can of soda with a secret screw-off top. But when you are talking about drug dealers, the go-to hiding spot is their vagina and/or anus. This area of the dealer's body is known as the vault. And if you have a dealer in custody and suspect such a storage method, there is a quick test to help confirm it. You smell the hand. Because if the dealer's hand has been in the vault, It will carry the corresponding strong body odor, as personal hygiene is not the hallmark of many street drug pushers. Smelling the hand is not, as you might guess, the most enviable part of the job. Usually you'll have a couple of cops doing Rochambeau to determine who the hapless sniffer will be. If you get a positive hit on the hand, or have other probable cause to go on, you'll likely do a strip search for narcotics. You'll put an officer in the back seat of the squad car to watch the suspect, as some dealers like to take this opportunity to cram their contraband more deeply into the vault. Once at the station, female officers will search female suspects, male officers will search males, and no cop who is of an opposite gender of the suspect is allowed in the room when the search occurs. If you have a transgender suspect, they get to pick the gender of the searching officer. Once in a while, a drug suspect will be in the midst of gender reassignment surgery and have the intimate parts of both genders. They may ask you for a male officer for one portion of their body and a female officer for the other. And that's no problem. As police, we are flexible and will accommodate this request. So you glove up and get to work. After the males disrobe, you instruct them to lift their penis and scrotum. Women are to raise their breasts. Both genders are to bend over, spread their buttocks, and cough hard. If a suspect is carrying some extra pounds, they must lift up their folds of fat. One of my co-workers, Lieutenant Angela Wilhelm, worked a number of years in the Tenderloin, a neighborhood in San Francisco infamous for street-level drug dealing. She told me of finding a softball-sized mass of dope in the creases of one woman's stomach. In another woman's blubber, she unearthed some lottery tickets. Sometimes there's drugs socked away in a suspect's hair, too, so you tell them to vigorously ruffle it as you step back to avoid the dandruff and critters. If you see suspected narcotics and any portion of the package is wedged in a bodily crevice, the suspect has to remove it. You yourself may not, because that's considered a body cavity search that only trained medical personnel are allowed to perform. Body cavity searches require a warrant. Some doctors, at least in San Francisco, have refused to do them even when presented with the lawful warrant signed by a judge ordering them to, the reason being they don't want to compromise the trust of the doctor-patient relationship, especially for something they don't consider a medical emergency.
And that was the first half of Chapter 3, Addiction, from Policecraft by Adam Plantinga. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States. Today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you to be honest, smart, and beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.